Foreclosed is an action stealth adventure title adorned with a visual novel aesthetic and in many ways acts as an allegory for the times that we're living in right now. There are some real high moments here, but also a few that left me frustrated. As always, we'll go over story, gameplay, controls, visuals and performance on the Switch, as well as value. Our system works a bit like the old magazines you used to buy in the 90s and gives an overall percentage score. Thanks to Publisher Merge Games for the review copy. Is this one Blade Runner, or is it more Blade walk along a bit, stumble, trip over your own shoelaces and fall face down? Let's find out. Things start off on a strong foot. The narrative of Foreclosed is an interesting one. You play as Evan Capnose, who finds that his identity has become foreclosed. This then means that all the augments that he has, his job, everything about him would need to go back to its original owner. Unfortunately, if you remove the implants, then the person dies.
All goods connected to Secure Tech have to be evaluated.
I thought the narrative was well handled from the aesthetic perspective, with the comic book segments doing a really good job of tying together the gameplay and story. Where I wasn't as convinced was in some of the voice acting.
There was still a chance I could restore the internal network.
The main character himself just doesn't sound right. It feels like a poor man's Keanu Reeves, and let's be honest, Keanu isn't exactly the world's greatest actor. The rest of the voice acting cast do an okay job. There's a knockoff G-Man in here, and the writing, while suitably comic book, does a good job of carrying things along. You do have a few times where you have choices to make in terms of your response dialogue, but it doesn't feel like you're changing the outcome in a huge way. There's one choice at the very end of the game to decide your fate, but unfortunately the resolution came across as a little part-baked. Foreclosed plays out in a few different ways. It can be split into adventuring segments, stealth segments, and shooting and action. The adventure segments tend to have you moving through the world, shifting and transitioning from screen to screen. Sometimes you'll have to hack, which is done using the D-pad buttons, or you might be crawling through a vent, listening to some conversations, and you can use one of your augments to track down signal sources. They're shown here on the screen, and the closer you get, the more the signal lights up, and eventually you can press A to hack into them. I thought these segments worked well enough to break the gameplay up, and then you'll hit a stealth area. And despite what you might think, stealth is actually a very difficult thing to do well. I've recently been playing The Last of Us 2, and whatever you think about that game, it does stealth incredibly well. Here though, enemies don't have any observation skills. It's either all or nothing. You can hack into their minds to do silent takedowns, but a body left on the ground won't alert anyone if they see it. However, if you're spotted, the entire area suddenly knows where you are. This is okay in the segments where you can then fight back and kill everyone, but there are also a few moments where one sighting and it resets you all the way back to the last checkpoint. It's such a frustrating mechanic, and I don't understand why it's in a game in 2021. It's just not a fun thing to have to repeat the same area over and over again, especially when the detection mechanics can be a touch hit and miss. Thankfully, I can only think of one time in the game where this became a big problem. The final element is the action. Your character has a number of abilities which you'll gradually unlock as you gain experience. They can be assigned to the different buttons on the controller, and there's a balancing act between using them and overheating. If that happens, you're temporarily unable to move, and things can go downhill quickly. There's no health system here. As you take damage, the screen gradually goes grey, and then it's a case of cowering behind cover until the screen regains colour and it's once more into the fray. The shooting feels quite old school. You can flip between the left and right sides of your character, but there's no cover mechanics here. You can't stick to the edge of a surface and peer around. You'll simply have to strafe left and right. And although headshots do extra damage and you can do one-shot headshot kills, the combat feels incredibly dated. As soon as you're spotted, enemies can see you from everywhere on the map. They charge in headlong, laser focused wherever the player is, and it all feels very wooden. You can apply different modifications to your weapons as well to improve their armor penetration and other skills, and this is toggled by clicking in the stick. Again, this will add to the overheating element of your character, and certainly there are some cool moments where you can levitate enemies up into the air and crash them into the ground, and there's a telekinesis ability where you can pick up items and send them crashing into the enemy. Foreclosed would have benefited from a ragdoll physics system. As it is, you can shoot 20 people and have them all fall in the same way, and that levitation of items just doesn't feel natural when you're used to Havoc-based games. The game's only around 4 hours long, and it's split into several different stages. At one point, you do have the choice of where to go next, but it won't change the outcome. There's a lot to like in terms of narrative, but for me, the gameplay elements just don't tie together well enough, and the combat came across as clunky and a touch awkward. My favourite segments were the adventure ones, those where I was required to do a bit of puzzling, some hacking, and then tracking down the signals. The way the game handles its narrative is stylish, and its augment system a nice idea, but it feels straight out of the 90s in regards to many of its design elements, even down to not being able to shoot while you're crouched. As far as the controls go, you have a few options in terms of XY axis, but you cannot change the sensitivity of the camera. It was one of the first things I went to do, and sure, you can change your aim sensitivity, but nothing else. And that camera in the third person mode is a touch lethargic. Overall, I give gameplay 13 out of 20, and the controls score 13 out of 20. Visually, Foreclosed looks stunning. It has a beautiful art style in my opinion. It manages to combine a low poly look with a real sense of scale and detail, and I love the stylish shifts between visual perspective as you move between the panes of the comic book, and small flares like the onomatopoeic words appearing on screen certainly go a long way to making this a believable experience. I loved the use of colour, and the performance across the board is actually very good. There's a few times when it stutters down, but generally you're looking at a high frame rate. It's a game that could have used a text size option. When you're playing on a Switch Lite, it's something you'll notice, but thankfully everyone is voice acted. And it has original soundtrack that's very much in keeping with its Blade Runner inspiration. However, the voice acting doesn't really keep up to that high standard.
Why all this staging to snap up the goods of a small-time company like SecureTech?
While I love the visual style, it's let down by a lack of animation with a clone army of enemies. Visuals score 14 out of 20, and audio scores 14 out of 20. Foreclosed has a 20% discount until launch day, which puts it down to £11.99. Usually this would be £14.99, and it has a run time of just over 4 hours. Now, I don't really care if a game's massively long or hugely short. It's the gameplay and the overall experience which make the difference to me in terms of the value. I think they missed the mark in terms of gameplay on this one. I love the visual style and I enjoyed the experience, but I came away feeling a tad flat. As it stands, it would be a wait for a sale, and I give value 14 out of 20.
I need a car, now!
I sincerely hope the developer go on to make a sequel. With a few tweaks to its gameplay formula, Foreclosed could be an excellent series. As it stands, it misses the mark in a number of areas, and as such, it gets an overall SwitchUp score of 69%. Thanks so much for watching. We hope you've enjoyed the review. Let me know in the comments what you think of this one. I played a good chunk of Axiom Verge 2 last night. My goodness, that game is great. So we're hoping to get that review to you. We've got quite a few others as well. There's some big games launching in the foreseeable future. I'm sure you know what they are. So make sure you're subscribed, your notifications and all that fancy stuff are on. And as always, a big thanks to our patrons. You guys are amazing. And to everyone who hangs out in the Discord, we've got a nice little group there. If you want to join that Discord, it's completely free. You don't have to be a patron or anything like that. For all things Switch, all the time, keep it Switch up. Cheers, guys. See ya!